Imagine you have to go to your biggest client and tell them that you screwed up. Not because you acted with bad intent, but because a gap in people and process put your leadership to the test. Stay tuned for another great episode of Bad Boss Confessional. Hi, I'm Beth Fahey, and welcome to Bad Boss Confessional. I've been a leader for over 30 years, and I'll be honest, I've made plenty of mistakes along the way. The thing is, those mistakes taught me more about leadership than any success ever did. This podcast is where we get honest about the moments we'd rather forget and discover why they're actually the ones worth remembering. Each week, I talk with leaders who aren't afraid to share their worst boss moments and what they learned from them. Because here's what I know: every great leader has a story they're not proud of. And this is where we tell those stories. Today's guest is Michael Deutsch, an EOS implementer out of New York City. Before becoming an EOS implementer, Michael spent 25 years in senior leadership in a variety of industries, guiding high growth organizations, and later he became a business owner himself. Thanks so much for joining us today, Michael. It's so good to see you.
Hey, Beth. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, I was wondering if you would give us maybe a little bit more background on your career path, because I did a little sleuthing before this call and I was surprised to learn how many different industries that you've actually been in.
Yeah, you could say I've been through a few of them. The interesting thing was I like to say I grew up in the technology space, and technology can be industry agnostic, much like we are with EOS. So I bounced around between different industries, had a ton of different experiences. It all started, I guess, for me in the mid '90s when I came out of college, and I was actually a hands-on engineer, senior system engineer, working for a lot of different types of organizations. So I was doing everything from large banks. So the city banks at DLJ doesn't exist anymore. Bear Stearns doesn't exist anymore. JP Morgan, very large banks. And then I ended up transitioning to, believe it or not, the commissioner's office of Major League Baseball, which still till today, one of my favorite jobs. It was just so much fun. And as a New Yorker, I was there in '96 when the Yankees were first making their playoff and World Series runs. So it was a lot of fun to be there during that time.
I'll
Um,
bet.
but that was really hands-on engineering technology. By the late '90s, I transitioned into the internet world because if you remember back then, the internet bubble was booming at the time, and I became part of leadership for an internet startup in 1999. And I was with them for about, I guess, about 3 years or so, give or take, and helped the company grow. But if you remember back then, 9/11, right after 9/11, the internet bubble burst. So it was time to move on. And I always kind of laugh at my own story because I went from one booming and busting industry into the next booming and busting industry without realizing it. I went from an internet startup into the mortgage industry. So in 2000, yeah, I know it's funny, right? I think there's something about me. So I went to the mortgage industry in 2002 as that industry was really starting to gain momentum. And I started with a mortgage company as part of leadership for a mortgage company. And when I started with them, we were doing about 30 million in revenue. We had, I guess, about 300, 350 or so employees, and we had about a dozen offices in the New York tri-state area. Within a couple of years, we were doing 350 million in revenue. We had over 3,000 employees. We had 65 offices nationally. We were actually going international too, expanded business lines of business. I mean, it was just tremendous growth. And then over a 6-year period, we ended up IPOing. We delisted. We got acquired by Deutsche Bank, which is a whole other crazy story. And the timing of that is a little bit crazy. But if you remember that world, 2008, that industry crashed. So early 2009, and so that industry crashed, mid to late 2008. If you remember, it was about August. And so by the time everything shook out in early 2009, trying to figure out what my next move was, I saw an opportunity to start my own business, and so I did that. Started my own business in New York City. It was an electronics recycling business. So me and a partner, we bootstrapped it, we grew it, we ran it for about a decade, and then after about a decade, I ended up exiting out and selling to my partner. Had a brief stint as head of technology and operations for a very high-end community center that was under construction here in New York City at the time. Just did that for about 2 years until right around the time of COVID. And then immediately after that, became an EOS implementer. And so since then, I've kind of been, yeah, as you know, working with business owners and their leadership teams and really helping them and I look at it mentoring them through my experiences and my knowledge and helping them run better businesses, more efficient businesses.
Well, I have to say, I mean, I feel like I need to make a joke here about I'm a little worried about the EOS implementer business.
Yeah, I mean, take a look at it. I was with a community center during COVID. You can imagine what happened with that. Yeah, right before that, my business, I think actually my business is still up and running. I mean, I haven't been involved in it in a number of years, but aside from that, the mortgage industry, the internet bubble, a number of banks that no longer exist. Yeah, good times.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
Oh, but it just shows resilience, right? I mean, that's entrepreneurs in a nutshell. Is like, "Oh, this is broken? Okay, I'll move on to the next thing," right?
It's not just moving on, it's moving on and learning, and that's the best part, right? Is you really have to figure out what happened, who you want to be, what the next iteration of you is going to be tomorrow, and not let it beat you down.
Yeah, so with all those different industries and experiences, I'm sure you have tons of stories.
I have tons. I mean, you can't be in doing all of that and not have some rough stories.
Yeah. So, looking back, is there something that you'd like to share with us from your past, being a boss that maybe, it wasn't your greatest day?
Would I
And
like to share, Beth? I don't know if I'd like to share it, but I guess I have to because of the podcast. Yeah, I thought about it. There was always this one story that stood out. So, as I mentioned, the business that I started was an electronics recycling business. So, if you know anything about recycling or waste management in general, it has a reputation to be not so on the up and up. So when my partner and I started the business, we said we're not going to be those guys. We want to be an ethical recycling company focused on electronics, of course, primarily because both of us came from the technology space, and that's what we knew. And we saw that opportunity in New York City to be able to do that at the time. So I'm starting the story just to give you a little bit of background on the philosophy and mindset, because as it kind of plays out, we were faced with a tough decision, and we ended up having to fall back on essentially what our core values are. But we said we were going to start this business, and we were going to be incredibly ethical every step of the way, even if it meant additional costs in the business, even if it meant things had to be harder, tougher. Independent audits. I mean, we had certifications and all kinds of different things just to make sure we were doing everything on the up and up. Anyway, fast forward probably about 8 or 9 years into the business, and we landed what was our biggest client at the time. They were a very large Fortune 500 company. I'm not going to name them. But what they did was every year they would release a commemorative item. They were pretty well known for it, in fact. And they'd been doing this for years and years and years. And these items became very, very popular. And over time, the company realized that these items were becoming collector's items. And so what they started to do, probably at this point, probably 30, 35 years ago, was they would hold back some of the supply. Very smart, right? They would hold back some of the supply, increasing demand, increasing pricing, not on the initial sale, but for the collectors behind the scenes. So they became collector's items, and by reducing the inventory and the supply out in the world, the value of these items increased. When they held back supply, what they did was they stored all of these items, well, the held back inventory, in storage units in a specific location. And they were paying over the course of 25, 30 years a tremendous amount of money annually to store these items. And they decided that, it didn't make sense to absorb these costs anymore. Why don't we just recycle these items? We're not doing anything. They've just been sitting in storage for 25, 30 years. Let's get rid of them. And so they contracted us to handle those items, which was great. It was our biggest contract. We were excited. And so we did that. Now, what ended up happening was that because there were so many items, we're talking tens of thousands of items here over the course of 25 years, we didn't have the capacity. So we ended up outsourcing some of our logistics, but all of the trucking logistics and some of the labor logistics to a third party with oversight from us. And so they were handling that. Well, one day in the middle of the project, towards the tail end of the project, I get a call on a Sunday, no less, from my partner, who said, I think I found something really strange and interesting. I've been looking on eBay because I'm really curious about how these things are collector's items and what the value might be. And I noticed a bunch of items came online in the last week or so. I said, what do you mean? And jumped on eBay and we're looking and we had gone in and we had done a full inventory of all these items. So we knew what was there. It was interesting because some of these items were items, not some of them, all of them were items that we had inventoried. Now that doesn't mean that anything was going on because these were out in the market. Could just be someone was selling them, but it was very coincidental and we were seeing multiple of the same items. We started to go back and look at a little bit further and a little bit deeper, and we realized that these items were not widely available. It wasn't like someone was putting 5 or 10 or 20 up every couple of months. There'd been 1 or 2 over the course of years. So we ended up watching it for a couple of days, and we saw more and more items coming on, and we started to get a suspicion that someone had been stealing. We didn't know where in our supply chain someone was stealing. So, now immediately we're panicked because we're under contract. We're an ethical company hired to do something ethical. Where is this happening? Is it happening with us? Is it happening with our logistic company? Is it happening with what we call our downstream partners, the partners who are taking the material and then actually physically recycling them and breaking them down? Where is this happening? Is it happening? We're not 100% sure. What do you do? Right. So the first thing that we decided to do was we need to own up to it. We need to call the company. And of course, our fear is everything from, we knew that this company being at the time, they were probably 6.5, $7 billion in revenue. They're twice that now. Their in-house attorneys payroll probably cost more than our entire company. I mean, that was the joke anyway that we used to say. So we were very afraid. And so first thing we did was we got on the phone with them and we owned up to it. And it was a short but poignant conversation between my partner and I on, do you think they're looking at eBay? Should we say something? Should we not say something? And immediately was, we have to say something. That's not who we are. And we leaned into our core values and actually said something to them. And we got called in and everything was audited and we had to explain everything that was going on. And it was pretty painful. It was not an easy conversation to have, but we knew we were doing the right thing in the situation, and so we did. And the story, as it turns out, was they got their head of security involved, who jumped in, not just did the audit, but did the investigation, and they found out that it was the project manager from the third-party logistics company who had been taking stuff on the side, and he put it out there. And so in a way, we were happy that it wasn't our own team, but also we represented the entire project. So till this day, it's it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing, and it was unfortunate and cringeworthy for sure because of the failure on our biggest customer and our biggest project.
Mhm. So, if you were to cite a weakness in one of the 6 key components of your business, right? Because that's where all issues stem from. Where did this originate from?
I think it was probably deepest in 2 areas. I would say it's people, and I would say it's process. We definitely did not have the right process or a solid process in place. It was also people, not necessarily. Well, of course, it was people on their side, on the logistics side, right? If they had somebody stealing, that's a whole other issue. But what ended up happening, immediately while this was going on, and immediately afterwards, we did basically a hot wash of the situation to understand what happened. The way that it went down was that the salesperson who sold the deal sold me on being the project manager for the job because they said, I brought it in and I want to make sure it goes perfectly. It's my client. I'm going to be on top of everything. They were not a project manager. They were not a project leader. And it was, if you ask me, right person, wrong seat for a project manager role of something of this size with this many moving pieces and moving parts. And I made a wrong decision to allow that to go on, even though I knew in my gut, and I had conversations with the person, said, this is not what your strength is. And he insisted on handling it. And I let it go. And I should have made a different decision. And I should have made sure I had the right people handling the project and overseeing everything beginning to end. We also realized we didn't have a process in place for this, a solid process in place. There were gaps in here. We had what we thought was a good process, but look, pressure tested. Hindsight's 2020, I guess. It wasn't very good. And so that needed to be buttoned. It should have been buttoned up before I even let him take over the job because, again, like many salespeople and many visionaries, they're chasing shiny objects. He's very excited by the deal, wants to make sure it's going well, but not paying attention to the details. Not a high fact finder, as we like to say. And we needed a high fact finder in that case because we needed somebody on top of everything. So I think those were some of the biggest lessons. And of course, one of the biggest lessons that and I mentioned it twice already, I believe, is live those core values. I still believe in my gut today that had we not said something to the company as quickly as we did, in the way that we did, that things might have turned out differently. At the end of the day, um, I don't remember all the details, but they essentially paid their contract. They didn't use us again, at least under my watch. I don't know if they came back after I left the company. But we lost them as a customer, and that rightfully so, I would say, which was also painful. However, I was comfortable with the decision that we needed to tell them. It was the right thing to do. It was the ethical thing to do. It lived within our core values, and so until today, I push it with my clients, and it's just always the way that I choose to live. So I'm comfortable with the decision. Hate that I lost the client. Hate that whole situation went down and that something was stolen. They did recover all the materials, by the way, but still, it's definitely a cringeworthy story.
Yeah. Well, there's so much here, right? I mean, so one of the things that I'd like to just touch on is something that I see all the time, and I know that I've certainly experienced it myself, is that feeling of manager overwhelm, where managers know that they might not have the right person, right? There's something, it's gnawing at you. It's like your gut is telling you, not sure they're the right person. But boy, I am really exhausted. And if I don't have them do this job, then I've got to do it. So I'm just gonna, cross my fingers and hope everything goes okay.
And that
So
was that was a bit of what happened, I would say, to me, to some extent. I should have been more involved in it myself, or we should have had someone else in there who was really good at project management.
and then there's the other voice in your head that's like, "Yeah, but I've gotta let go. I've got to let people make their own mistakes." And it's like this conundrum, right? That you have as a manager.
It's so much easier to let go, though, when you have the right person in the seat, right? And that's ultimately what it came down to, was that had I had the right person in the seat for that role, for that specific job, if it was truly a project manager with the qualifications of a project manager, who, not how, that's the right person to do it. I didn't
Yeah.
have that person in there.
Yeah.
And so I ended up trusting someone. And again, it wasn't malicious, by any
Sure.
means. He just wasn't the right person for the
Yeah.
job, for the seat. And I shouldn't have allowed that to happen. I should have made sure that we had the right person running that project.
Right.
So I see what you're saying, but I still take it as it was the failure on my part for not insisting on having the right person in the seat and then letting go.
Yeah. And it's usually not just one thing, right? And so you said it's people and process, which by the way is it's like almost that's probably 90% of the issues that are on an issues
That's
list.
right.
If people are 83%, then process just.
That's right.
Um, but having a process that, you're not checking ahead of time, you're not absolutely sure. And again, this is where it's a push pull, right? Do I get all the way in the weeds and figure out exactly what should be happening? Do I don't want to micromanage this person, but is the process okay? And so what do you think now that you're watching clients sort of going through the same things? What is your spidey sense as an EOS implementer when you start to hear people and process issues? Like, how are you coaching your clients through those?
Well, I think a lot of it, and I've had a little bit of a uh, a phrasing change in how I talk about certain things. In EOS, we talk a lot about on the business versus in the business. And if I'm being honest, I've always struggled a little bit with recognizing, I wouldn't say recognizing, it's really explaining when something is on the business versus in the business. You kind of know it when you see it. It's that sort of thing. But to verbalize it, I struggle with that a little bit. And I recently read a Harvard Business Review article. In the article, they actually used the term on the system versus in the system. And all of a sudden, a light bulb went off. And I started to really think about, and the article talks a little bit about this, about the building the system for the future. That's a leader's job. I just build the system for the future, and then I start to take in, a bit of what we talked about a couple minutes ago, which is resiliency, scaling, growth. If you're a leader, and I talk all the time about, the leader's job is a thinking person's game. Where are you spending the time strategizing and thinking about building this overarching system, this resilient, scalable system for growth for the future? If you're so busy in the system, how are you actually building the system itself? You're going to continue to repeat these problems. That seems to be opening it up a little bit more to getting people to recognize that they actually have to build that system. That system is the right people, and that who, not how, as we know from, Dan Sullivan, right? So that system is that 10x is easier than 2x. That system is processes, and having the right processes in place, and having the data in place so we can actually look at that data, and understanding how and when and where to unpack issues and how to do it efficiently, and all of the stuff that we talk about in EOS. That's the system at the leader level, right? That's the system. And so for me, it's really helped me make a difference in session to talk about the system that they need to be building and giving them context for that.
Hmm. That's great. I like that. I may have to steal that.
Please do.
And by the way, that I think that same issue of Harvard Business Review is sitting on my end table, and I congratulate you for making it through an article.
I try to read it. It's such a great magazine, but it could take a while to get through. So yeah, I
It
get
is.
it.
I do love the magazine, though.
Yeah, so do I.
Um, okay, so now getting back to your core values. With this experience that you've had, right? And this really um, hit you in the gut, it sounds like. And you've got this experience to draw upon. How do you ever relate the same story to your clients when you're talking about core values in session?
I've told this story around core values. I've told this story around people, process. Yeah, I use it all the time because it's relatable. And also, the reason that we're having this conversation, I feel like very often people think that entrepreneurs can never fail, or entrepreneurs don't fail. They run these successful businesses, and the view from the outside looking in is one of success. Very often they don't understand the pains that people go through, often the ugly truth behind the scenes, and the stories that people, not that they won't share, but that they don't share because we're so busy dealing with the day in and day out. So I think a lot of times when I'm in session and I can bring up a lot of these stories, it helps me to relate to them to relate to me, but also give them a real world example of how and why you should be using our tools in EOS, or how and why you should be using any tools, or the frame of mind to make a decision, and how you're thinking about and approaching these different decisions that you have to make day in and day out.
Now, did you use EOS in your electronics recycling company or
I
anything?
didn't, and that's part of my origin story is when I say how I came to EOS, and I was reading Traction, and as I was going through it, and I said to myself, these are the concepts, the business concepts I've always tried to do with my business, with my teams. I didn't know there was a system for this with tools. I wish I had known. So much more makes sense right now to me. Had I had this, I probably could have had a different outcome in different places. But no regrets because I love doing what I do now. So everything works out for the best. But I could see how things would have been different in my business, or even on teams that I was running. In the mortgage company, in the community center, in the internet company, even way back when, I could see how things may have played out a little differently had I had tools to actually use instead of just concepts that I was trying to apply, which is, we're doing that in EOS too, but the tools help to get there.
Yeah. And I think about half of us have used EOS in companies before becoming implementers, and the other half haven't and wish they had.
Yeah, yeah,
My experience was that we did use an implementer and we did implement EOS in my bakery business. And it was interesting because when we first came up with our core values, they didn't really land. I mean, it's like we went through the exercise. It kind of felt right at the time, but I'll be honest, I left vision building day 1 and I thought, "This is a bunch of crap." I don't really believe that these are our core values. I don't know. And over time, when you have something, when you're experiencing things within your own business that then you can apply to those actual core values, like you did in your business, it really starts to drive it home. And then what I find is then the leadership team kind of doubles down on these core values. And then it becomes almost contagious throughout the organization. And it sounds like, thankfully, you and your partner were definitely on the same page because we've seen in a lot of companies where maybe not everybody is actually living the core values that they espouse. And it's the humble ones, right? That want to live those core values that I
Yeah,
think do the
look,
best.
I talk a lot about the core values are not just nice words. It's actually a tool, much like everything else in EOS when we talk about it, it's a tool. If you're not using the tool, then you're leaving something on the table. How is it a tool? And I might have even stolen this from you. It's a set of behaviors. Did I steal that from you? I may have. I don't
I
know.
don't know, say
Anyway,
more.
so, really what core values are, it's not just concepts and ideas or principles. It's a set of behaviors that we expect people to behave with. Part of what I talk a lot about is I can't hold someone accountable to something, an expectation that I haven't set. I need to say it. I need to set the expectation and then I can hold them accountable to it. The core values is a set of behaviors and you communicating it from the leadership level, you communicating it through the organization is setting that expectation. We're going to hold you accountable to these behaviors. If you don't behave this way, well, then that's a violation of our core values. If you do behave this way, then it's great. We're going to call that out too. Right. And really what we need is to have those core values socialized or become part of the fabric of the organization. And you can use it, we say all the time, hire, fire, review, reward, recognize, all of that. Yeah, that's great too. But you can also coach and train and mentor, make business decisions like I did around them. There's a lot of different things that you could use these core values for if you view them as a tool and not just a set of nice words that you're going to, put on a poster and stick on a wall or, put as a screensaver or something, the common things that we typically hear, which is great too, just to reiterate them, but you have to actually use them as a tool as well.
And there's such great things to attach stories to. And quite honestly, stories are what people remember.
It's true.
So,
It's
and you
true.
had a great story there with yours that
Thank you.
continues to echo.
Trust me, it echoes when I think about it. Not necessarily in the best way, but, you know, cringeworthy story, but it's a lesson learned.
Do you think that those core values follow you?
I do. I think, a lot of those core values are, and look, they originated from me and my partner. I would say that they mirror the EOS core values, which are the core values that I work to live by. I add one or two for my own, like have a sense of humor, right? I think it's important for us to have a sense of humor behind the scenes as we're working because, I say all the time, we're not solving world peace. I would love to. I wish I could in the session room, but that's not what's happening. So, but I do think that they are who I am as a person.
Yeah,
The
what
do
are
the
they? Do you mind sharing? So, have a sense of humor is one.
have a sense of humor is one. Actually, these days I kind of align to the EOS core values.
Okay.
So, help first, do the right thing, do what you say. I add my have a sense of humor as my personal one because I think it's important. But yeah,
Yeah, I think the core values we had from the bakery still s- follow me. Because like you said, my sister and I, who I mean, we grew up in the same household, we certainly had very similar core values growing up. We had make the next person successful, which to me is do the right thing
that's
and do
right.
what you say, right?
Yeah, and help
That
first.
those right?
Hmm.
And go the extra mile, which I guess is a little bit grow or die,
Hmm.
maybe.
Yeah.
And then we had generate positive energy, which was one that I wasn't always great at, and then act with reputation in mind. So again, do what you say. So a lot of
Sort
a
of a
lot
thing,
of
yeah.
a lot of core values I find amongst our clients, they're similar, but they're unique to everybody individually. But I think that if it's core to you, right, it resonates. And I think that it's kind of like your Colby. It is what it is, and it's not gonna change.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why I took on the EOS core values as my core values within my business, within generally in my world, because I do resonate with them. They're just worded a bit nicer than what I had before. So
And I love our core values at EOS, and I
yeah,
think that our community definitely reflects that. So,
agreed.
yeah. And we have, as a community, gone back and looked at our core values and examined, are we living them? And I think it's very important. It's such a touchstone for all of us, right?
I love the fact that they, will share a little bit behind the scenes, but they make us people analyze ourselves several times a year, I believe, right? And I actually now doing the same thing with my teams is I make them people analyze themselves. Sometimes I make them share, sometimes I don't, but I think it's good for a gut check. Are you actually living your core values? Um, there are times that I look at it and I'm like, I'm a little wobbly on that one these days. I need to think a little bit about what's going on and why am I so wobbly on that one? Right? I wouldn't say it's a minus, but maybe a plus minus. I don't know if I'm being honest. Right? But it makes me self-reflect and think about what's going on in my world and why is that?
And I will also do the same with my teams, and I'll say, "Look, you don't have to share how you rated yourself. If you gave yourself a plus, meaning that most of the time you're doing it, or a plus minus, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, or a minus that you're not really doing it at all. But here's what I would like you to share. I'd like you to share which core value you wanna be held a little bit more accountable to in the
I
coming
like that.
quarter." And then they share that with the rest of the team, and that then makes it okay for people to help them
I like
get
that.
better at certain core values. So, anyway, we'll return to my conversation with Michael after a word from our sponsors. Do you love running on EOS? Try Strutty, the EOS platform people love. Native integrations and extra features help you manage people, projects, process, and engagement. Connected to your favorite EOS tools and all in one place. You love EOS. It's time to love the platform you're running it on. Try Strutty free at strutty.com. That's STRETY.com. Strutty, the EOS platform people love. Let's be honest, hiring the right people is hard. That's why I love Titus Talent Strategies. Their whole person hiring approach helps you find and keep A players who align with your values, and they back it with an industry leading guarantee. Best part? Titus Talent Strategies is included in the entrepreneurial toolkit for companies running on EOS. Check them out at titustalent.com/EOS. And now back to my conversation with Michael. Well, this has been a lovely conversation. I don't want to
It
keep you too
has.
long, but I do want to ask you the one question that I ask all of my guests on the podcast, which is if you were to get a tattoo somewhere on your body that signified something that you're either currently working on or want to work on, or something that you wanted to be reminded of, what would that tattoo be and where would it be located?
Good question. I'm in the middle of reading Let Them by Mel Robbins. Have you read that
Mm.
book?
Mhm.
It's a great book. And it resonates a lot, and it kind of falls in line with a lot of the, if you've read, I'm sure you have positive intelligence and a lot
Mhm.
of the internal self-speak stuff. So if I could, I would say probably do Let Them.
Mhm.
And where would I do it? I think, you know what? You're gonna laugh. Maybe not. I think it sounds gonna like really painful, but I would probably do it here. This way, when I'm in a situation that I need the reminder, I can simply look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think most of the guests are saying somewhere on their wrist or their finger or somewhere that they would
Hmm.
see. You know, we're up at the whiteboard all the time, so I'd want to have a similar thing.
Maybe it's this side, then I can do it over here in the
Yeah.
front of the wrist.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's been a really nice conversation. I do miss our conversations in strategic coach. We were both in strategic coach together. But now we're on different
Tracks, paths.
tracks, cohorts or whatever. But anyway, it was so nice to get to know you during those
Oh, great.
that year or
I'm glad
so.
we had that time.
Yeah, it was fun. And now I've got a BFF at QCEs and EOS training. So
That's right.
it's good to see you there.
I love it. And in New York when you want to come visit.
Oh yeah. All right. There are some shows I want to see. So,
Come on. We'll
all
go.
right. Okay. Thanks
All
so
right, Beth.
much.
Thank
All right,
you.
Michael. Take care. Thanks to Michael Deutsch for sharing his story about people, process, and doing the right thing. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear this. Thanks for listening to Bad Boss Confessional. We'll see you again next week.